And I honestly felt stupefied. Like I was just dumbfounded by this tiny little beautiful jewel with wings looking at me right in front of my face. I mean, it definitely stopped my tears. Um, and I don't remember like it flying off or anything. I think I was just so dumbfounded in the moment.
Yes, and many children see them too. About 75% of the world's children today are being born with etheric vision. And when your children talk with people and have daydream playmates, the chances are they are actually speaking to some of these people. Because these angels or angelic forces or nature spirits, as they're often called, will often make themselves seen.
Whatever it is, it looks every bit like a fairy and very little like anything else.
But seriously, it kind of looks like a fairy. It just kind of doesn't look like your standard moth.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
But I wasn't going to make this video until I looked a little bit closer and I realized after it lands behind my bench, it disappears. And it just vanishes. And in fact, I went outside to look, to try to find it, to see if it was trash, to see if it was a bug, to see if it was a leaf, like trying to figure out what it could be, and it was gone. It just vanished.
What's that? Yeah. What's what? Yeah, look. Right up there. Insect or something.
Is that an insect? Let's have a look. What is it?
I don't know. Oh my god!
Oh.
What happens to people who cut down fairy thorns?
Did you see it? Huh? Did you see it?
Yeah, me and him saw it.
What'd you see?
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I'm not going to BS you guys. One of my partners said they saw something fall out of the sky too, so that's why I'm kind of curious. Did you see anything land in your backyard?
The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real.
Welcome everybody tonight to Fascinating Fae. Tonight we're traveling to Texas to talk to Katie. Katie, this is going to be a little bit of an unexpected intro from me for you, but let's just start by saying welcome back. How are things in Texas tonight?
Thank you. They're good here. A lot safer than they were last week with the hurricane and everything.
You know, Texas is a place that you shouldn't mess with, as the saying goes.
That's what they say.
I'm not like a geography nerd or anything. There are all kinds of nerd in me, but geography is not necessarily one of them. Sometimes I forget Texas has a lot of like beach, a lot of ocean. Because you kind of think of Texas as more like high cattle country or something, but it's got a lot of coastline.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit of everything, I think, except our mountains aren't very big. I think that's the only thing we're lacking.
Well, every single other thing about Texas makes up for that. So
yeah.
So I say a bit of an unexpected intro, and I'll kind of just hit you with it. So this is going to be the term of like a compliment sandwich, right? Or I can't remember exactly how that term flows, but it's like where you hammer some bad news in between two nice things.
Yes.
So I'm going to be doing that, but it's going to be more like a good thing followed by a compliment, followed by a bad thing at the end, which doesn't really fit the sandwich description. So it's more like an open-faced tartine of a of a thing, and it's nothing too bad. So don't get stressed out or anything.
Okay.
So for the audience listening, here we go. Yesterday, Katie and I had an amazing conversation, like just truly amazing. One that I'm happy to like let everyone listening and you, Katie, know again, I was extremely grateful for. And oh yeah. Not the least of which is how this conversation started, which was fully Fae influenced, to say the least. And the just beautiful flow of conversation that unfolded from that high watermark right at the top just carried on. It was like basically for me, and I said this during the episode that we recorded, it was like, it felt a lot like how I felt when I saw my Fae, when you and I started talking. Also, I'm just going to quickly, well, maybe not so quickly, because there's so many things that I actually do need to give thanks for to you personally, and also as part of this process to let the audience know what I appreciated about yesterday's conversation. And maybe all you foreshadowing clairvoyants out there know where this might be going, but we'll get there in a second. So, I mean, not least of which, Katie and I spoke for 2 hours or more. Oh man, where do I start? I'm going to briefly ask you permission for something, and then this will make sense for the audience in a second. So what you just heard, audience, at the top of the show was my portion of the audio that was captured as I came in and started to tell Katie the story of what had just happened to me before we started talking. But Katie, I'm sorry to inform you that your portion of the recording has not survived. The conversation was, in retrospect, so beautiful and so meaningful for the two of us that, like we talked about towards the end of that talk, some things are very fleeting and you have to be very aware of appreciating what you have when you have it, because you often don't know how long that is. And so when we finished talking, I did what I always do, which is hit stop on the two recording programs that I'm using. And in this particular time, QuickTime, which is where I'm recording you, flashed me a message that says process not complete, and then summarily crashed. And I spent quite a lot of time last night looking for where the autosave for that conversation portion on your end would be. And I did actually find where that folder is, and found nothing relevant to the discussion. But I did, I guess fortunately or unfortunately, depending on one's perspective, manage to successfully capture my side of the conversation. So there's that to start off with. And I kind of actually, unintentionally made it into the sandwich I first referenced. So here we go with the rest of the stuff I was planning on saying. I was going to say that at the end, but I realize now it probably just made more sense here to have just said it. So that's done now. Katie and I talked about so many things prompted by what you just heard. And so I'm going to briefly recap what you just heard for context. And then I'm going to also say, like I mentioned a second ago, the other things I really appreciated about the conversation with Katie. And then Katie, after that, we'll just kind of dust ourselves off and do another amazing episode here today without the need to recover or, say all the same things again. What will take its place is this intro. And Also, before I get there, I do want to say the conversation we had, as soon as I realized it was kind of gone, I just immediately locked it into my heart. And so in a way, it's not all that bad of a thing, because it was a really powerful conversation for me personally. So anyway, I go to start talking with Katie, my new guest, who I don't really know anything about other than she's been caught in a storm and I've been waiting to talk to her. and that she's a great emailer, great email writer, like full.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I mean, here I am talking to no one in my empty living room, basically. And then lo and behold, people start emailing me saying like, I really listen to your show. I really think about the stuff you're talking about. I like what you're doing. I love what you're doing. And, so that's how I've become initially connected to Katie. And so that made me feel great about talking to her, of course. But then what you just heard was me describing what happened, which was I was outside and getting ready to do my show. And my process is usually I smoke a joint so that I'm, not in pain and I can come lie here for an hour or two and talk to a guest. And as this was happening, a cop came around the corner suddenly. We had a brief, very odd interaction. And when I just say odd, I mean, this cop was behaving in an odd way for a cop, to say the least. And then he left, and then I was momentarily flustered, and I did one of those things where I just was like, okay, well, that was weird. That's over. Phew, like, holy shit, got my fucking heart going, but it's over. So, and I kind of distinctly finished the lit my joint again, because I put it out when the cop came running up to me. Even though cannabis is legal here, some habits are hard to fucking ditch. For all my smoker friends out there, you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, out of the bushes, these robin and hummingbird came. And by the way, Katie, I was standing here just now at the same spot, looking at where they came out of intently for a good 40 minutes before we started talking, really reliving what I saw. And here's a detail I didn't really include in yesterday's conversation. There's quite a bit of tall, dry grass at the threshold from the paved path, that's the park, and where this blackberry briar is. And the blackberry briar part is set back maybe 1 foot from the pavement, and then it's got quite a lot of tall, dry grass in front of it, kind of like a shield. And when I say tall, dry grass, I mean 8 to 10 inches tall to maybe a foot tall of dried out, kind of not weed whacked tall grass, basically. And that's where they came right out of. They just literally just like came. I was like, that's where they came out of. They both came right out of the grass, like right at the foot of the blackberry patch. And it was truly bizarre. And I am now able to bring into this conversation the beauty of hindsight. And it was so weird. It was so weird because I've said, in the beginning, which you're going to now have heard, that they stopped and looked at me, but they really did. And for the audience listening, I'll just throw some measurements out. So my unit is only 650 square feet total. And I think that side to side, it's 31 feet wide. It's not a very wide condo. It's pretty much a bachelor with a room in it for some reason. And then my deck is the same width, but it's only maybe 15 feet total. And then I have a little tiny path of gravel that's exactly 8 feet. And that path of gravel goes off of 2 stairs on my little ground floor patio deck and walks out onto this paved path. And the paved path, I looked at it intently today, is the size of 1 car width. So 2 people can stand on it side by side, basically. So from where these little birds were to where I was standing was no more than 8 feet plus 2 people standing side by side. I would say around 14 feet, 15 feet. And when they came like the little robin came running right over, and the hummingbird was right with them, right with them. Like they were very close as they came out of the bush, which is astonishing when I really have stopped and thought about it more. I've never seen that before in my entire life, ever. And what I did lose in the episode yesterday was telling everybody they can go to my personal Instagram at the Jim White, where they can see how much I love birds and how much I look at birds, because you'll see all my bird photos there. And so I'd never seen that before. And then the little guys were totally a duo. They were 100% a duo, because when the robin stopped, the hummingbird landed right beside him. And they both, not simultaneously, because the hummingbird landed a half second or two after the robin had stopped, they cocked both their faces in the same direction and showed me their what would be their left eye, basically. And I out loud said, I'm okay. I'm okay. I said it twice. And then it's like they didn't believe me, because the robin then ran right up to, and I looked at it today and it was like 4 feet in front of me, and looked at me again. And as he was doing that, the little hummingbird landed in the tree, which was a foot from my face. And they both looked at me again. And then I said out loud, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. I said it twice. And then as the robin left, the hummingbird left with them, and they both left in the same direction around the side of the building that the cop had come from and left from, and that the two people fighting had come from and left from.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And a detail that I want to share about my place, which, you know, outside of the fact that we lost this conversation, I'll just bring it up here briefly because it's relevant to the owl talk too. And then I'll finish the recap and move on with what I wanted to compliment you about, because that's so important to me to have on the record more than anything, I think. And these compliments like emanate and flow from what I'm going to just give voice to and say, Katie is a powerful manifester and channel of the Fae. Because what we're describing here is like the next level. Like, they've moved stuff in my house. They've lined up synchronicities. They took stuff and moved stuff from William in advance of me and him talking in synchronicity with that to prove a point. It's like, that's all crazy. And then you literally produced what I would consider my first like additional Fae sighting, for sure. Because those were two fairies. There's no other way. There's no other way to describe it. And that robin was quite gray in the chest for a robin, and he was smaller than the robins that I've been clocking around here. And I know the 3 robins that are in territory on this spot quite well, both by song and by visual identity, because I love the birds here. So I really do think that we collectively, you and I, in much the same way that William and I, or Jem and I, or Danielle and I, or what I'm starting to understand might be like a healthy balance of my guests, have conjured up the Fae in big and small ways at the onset of our episode journeys. For real. And it's wild. So that's kind of what I wanted to recap, and I'll finish with the description of the building and move on to the compliment like I talked about. I have the privilege to live in a pretty nice building, and, you know, that's a byproduct of just all the choices I made that ended up, you know, putting me in the position I am in today, but it's a huge change for me. So I'd say this all not to be like proud of my home. This is where I happen to be right now. So the way that this building is set up is quite remarkable for a condominium. The river next to me is quite a powerful old river and has quite a lot of waterfalls upstream from me, not far. And the river, at the part where it comes up to the building, is quite wide and flat and deep. And over time, the course of this river has carved out almost an island of land, and it goes around this building on more or less 3 complete sides in a gigantic, perfect arc, like a circle. And at the part where it, you know, has a little bit of land connecting is where the bridge goes over it, and then the building is on this peninsula that is now surrounded on literally, it's almost like it's surrounded on 4 sides by a river, if you could imagine that. The river has done a dramatic, almost back in on itself type of curve. And that's where everything kind of came and went from yesterday in that scenario. And so I do think that that's relevant. And I did finish, or do want to finish this little recap, I guess, just to kind of set the scene for here today by saying, a woman pointed out to me quite spontaneously last week that the owl, and this is a woman I don't usually talk to, but I was standing having a smoke like I usually do, and she just out loud said to me, "Here's something I think you want to know." And I said, "Oh, okay." Or no, she said, "Here's something you want to know." That's what she said. That's why I answered so confused. She said to me exactly that. "Here's something you want to know." And I said, "Whoa, okay, what?" And she said, "The owl has built its nest in this post covered in ivy at the foot of the bridge." And sure enough, I went over, and the owl and another one, and 2 young owls, it looks like, are living 55 feet from my front door. So the Fae have moved in is kind of what I'm getting at. They have absolutely fucking moved in, right? It's fascinating fucking Fae family fun time over here at my house, including, and not least of which, is the Fae you conjured up yesterday, Katie. So I've said a lot on the show that I think the Fae know your heart, and if that's true, then having a good heart is like it's like a power pack for the Fae. They can draw from that, and in companionship with you, pull things off. And I do think that in some way, the idea of like, how does one work with the Fae, I do think they're teaching everyone who's listening to this show and me how that works. And so I just think you have a good heart, you live that truth of your good heart through hard times and good, and then that's kind of like key. That's the ticket to the carnival, right? And then it's all about which ride do you feel comfortable enough.
Yeah, that's well, if I can interject really quick, about having a good heart, it made me think of how often children have experiences with the Fae. And, you know, if you're wondering what a good heart might look like, I would start with the heart of a child is kind of what that looks like. And we all started there at some point, and it kind of just got muddled with, you know, how society has tried to form us. So that's just something I wanted to add.
You're right. And William's episode starts with a clip from the Wall movie by Pink Floyd, where the teacher is seizing on this kid's artistic activity and shoving it down his throat and humiliating him for having a heart, basically. And William talks about that. Like, are we being suppressed? Is there a magic within us that is being suppressed, like institutionally, effectively, would be how you would look at it. Like a whole society against love and light. Is that what we're actually living in? It might be the case. Stuff to think about that comes up in this show was totally and will continue to be unexpected and pleasurable. That's a really good point. Can I share something that's come up before I move on, since you said that?
Sure.
So, I'll segue this into one of the things I really liked about talking with you. And so, because I know that we were ready to air all this, I'm comfortable to say the following. As many of the listeners who have intently listened to this show will know, I am dealing with and actively recovering from a really brutal police assault, which was no fault of my own, and I cannot stress that enough. It's actually the hardest part about talking about my assault is people I love and people I care about intimately, deeply, and personally, you know, as close as people can get to one another. Even as I'm telling them the story, have a small look in their face, which kind of feels like, well, what did you do to make that happen? Sort of like Breonna Taylor, what did she do? She was playing video games in her house, right? And she was black in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a fucking disgrace. And so you can't actually lay the blame on a random assault on the victim, but there's a tendency to do that. And so one of the things that I really appreciated enormously about talking with you, Katie, is that Katie was brave enough to reach out to me as part of her initial correspondence, but also in the show to really give it voice, that her partner was also involved in a nearly identical scenario to the one I'm recovering from. And that was a hugely unexpected thing. And you know, put yourself in my shoes, listeners, for a second. I am just a person. I'm not Joe, podcast host, like I said yesterday, and we missed that, unfortunately. But, you know, despite me trying to figure out who I am behind this mic, at times I, you know, would try to do things that I think are like good listener stuff, like be a good host. But other times I just can't. I'm just a person. I just can't help but be affected by stuff. And so the way that you approached that and made that available to me as like a sentiment was huge. And because like I have dealt with this entire affair entirely alone. And it's only very recently with some cool people around me who are encouraging types and consistent types that I've had the courage to even talk about it at all. And then especially as part of putting it in this show, the only thing that I felt was lost that I had said, and we talked for 2 hours and we both said really cool shit. Honestly, we talked so much about cool stuff. I wish the audience could have heard it, and I'm sorry to tease you all, but I was trying to get at this reaction I had to a compliment you gave me around all of this, where you were saying about essentially that you really appreciate the show and you're being really genuine and detailed about that. And then as part of that, you were saying to me how you appreciate my ability to be honest about that. And you were sort of saying that like the show's guests being honest, me being honest about my place and where I'm at right now was what encouraged you and made you feel like this was a safe environment for you to also come on and be honest.
Yes.
And that means a lot to me, because like I said a second ago, it's hard to have the compassionate listenership I actually require. And I really need people who are not, well, I'll just say this, not to talk too much about myself, but this is also relevant that I feel like it's going to come out in the wash here. Where I learned to be a good listener was at the counter of my dispensaries. And you might think it sounds fun selling millions of dollars of weed to people. And don't get me wrong, it has its high moments. But that job put me face to face just about every 5 minutes with somebody going through the worst stuff you could imagine. Rape victims, active street level sex workers, this one kid who had been like abducted when he was 11 and held against his will for 7 years and brutally assaulted by a group of men. A guy who had lost both his legs in an on-job accident, a woman who'd had a hysterectomy after nearly dying, giving birth. It was on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And the reason I actually was good at my job and made so much money and had such a hugely successful dispensary enterprise, because I was super traumatized myself. And then it would just be like two traumatized people talking honestly with one another. And then I also know my weed, so that didn't hurt. But when I talked with you yesterday, it was the first time in 2 years that I honestly felt like I can tell you, I've told 3 people the extent of my story. And in those processes, I'm exhausted afterwards every single time. But yesterday, the way that you were able to relate your partner's story to me was a relief. And it was a relief because it was, and I don't want this to sound in any way like I'm hitting on you, because I'm madly in love with somebody and you have a partner. But it was incredibly wonderful to have a compassionate, beautiful, intelligent, soft-spoken woman who knew what I was going through, and I could hear that in your voice. And it was a fucking relief. It was just a huge relief. It was one of the nicest things that's happened in a long time for me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. And your partner, for him, I'm going to say something, even though I don't know him. He loves you more than you can imagine for being there for him through this. And I say that as a person who's done it alone and wished that I could have somebody that checks all those boxes I just said around to help me So thank you from him out of my mouth.
I really.
That's a good woman, everyone listening. And in my opinion, in my humble opinion.
Oh, I appreciate it.
I mean it, and I just mean it exactly how it hit. So now listen, Katie was also incredibly gracious and brave to talk about her mother passing away during COVID. And I'm not going to make you do that again. It was horrible to hear about, and it was extremely stressful. And it timed up with an incredibly difficult property scenario. And unfortunately, her mother passed, but fortunately, the property scenario resolved. Other things that you said that really struck me that I want to just finish by complimenting you, and then I'll properly bring you on the show in maybe 30 seconds or less, hopefully, was at one point I was talking a lot about how the world is really magical, and we were talking about quantum physics and just phenomena of life that can be magical. And you were really proper and elegant to bring it back down and say, like, you know, it might sound insulting to somebody who's going through the worst time of their life right now to hear two people talking about how life is magical. And so that almost made me like doubly or triply appreciate you, because you're not just fluff. Like, that is something that I wish I kind of had noted. And I felt almost like, not embarrassed, but I was like, man, you're right. And then that's why I added so much to that sentiment after you said it, because so many times in my life, I haven't been in a place that feels like good at all. And I don't want to be mocking people that are there whatsoever. So we're about to talk to Katie, and that's my compliment sandwich. And I don't know why the audio recording did not complete the way it should. I mean, I just hit stop and it crashed. And I think that it just happened so that I could hold that conversation in my heart and reflect all that back to you at the start. And that's the best I think I can do with it when, you know, after I came to the conclusion it was finally gone. I just decided to approach it in this way. I hope that was okay, and I'm so sorry that I lost that, and I'm sorry that you put all that time in and that it's gone. I'm sorry for that.
Well, it's gone in a sense, but the conversation was still had. So who knows? You know, hopefully it comes through tonight just fine.
I'm looking at you now. It's good. So Katie, thanks for letting me let you down. I hope that my I hope my recap was a consolation prize. And I don't know. One of the things I said to Katie yesterday was I just kind of felt like I had been held in a loving embrace, and I didn't want to sound like creepy or anything, but I think sometimes you can be just held in, someone can hold space for you in their heart, and you can feel that, and that's how I felt. So yeah.
Well, it's amazing to hear that I was able to provide that for somebody. I really honestly had no idea. So, I mean, you never really know like the impact you have on people. So like hearing the impact that you had through our conversation yesterday, that's quite a compliment for sure. I appreciate it.
It's really hard as a trauma survivor, like that type of trauma, which is like violent and everything, and physical and a person to person, like, you know, touch to touch kind of thing. It's so hard for me to like chill out. It's so hard to this day. But I felt like my shoulders dropped yesterday. It's just like, I could have this person in my ear forever. Anyhow, so one of the things I was segueing on just before we got to bringing you on was I just wanted to say something about your childlike brain type of comment. You know, at the top of the show, that British guy talks about 75% of the world's children today being born with etheric vision. I would go so far as to say that we have quantum vision, and that it actually is totally intact on birth. We also probably have quantum capabilities, much like the Fae, because it would totally appear that the Fae are teaching everyone who's listening to this show that what is material and what is spirit is not as defined as one might consider, in the science books of, say, the 1990s. One of the things that I do to get back to childhood state, and I do this pretty intentionally because I'm traumatized, and I try to remember I am just a kid. I was a kid, I'm still just like no actual training on how to live life like everybody else. We don't really get life skills in school. We get like that clip at the start of William's episode. We get kind of bullied by everybody, including the teachers. But what I do is I do the following 3 things all the time, and this is my personal reveal and recipe book to the audience. Please don't think I'm lame. This is super enjoyable, and I encourage all of you to adopt these practices. They are delightful. Whenever I see an animal or a bug at all, I add the word "o" to that particular thing's name. So if I see a bird, I'll say, "Hello, birdo." And if I see a slug, I'll say, "Hello, sluggo." And if I see a bug, I'll say, "Hello, buggo." And if a bug is coming too close to me, I'll say, "Buggo, watch out, buggo, 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 watch out, watch out, watch out. You have to turn around." I talk to them in that voice. And sometimes, if it's like a mouse, maybe it's like an Italian mouse. Maybe it's like a Bertono Mouserono, Or maybe it's like a Japanese mouse, like a Sensei Mauso. So I tell them, "Hello, Bertono Mouserono, how are you doing today?" And they do seem to know that it's a delightful sound and they like it. Try it in your garden when you see the next thing. It's quite fun. And people will look at you strange, especially other adults, aka girls you're trying to date. Not naming anybody. But, I do what I do. Another thing that I do, and this is a pretty important one. If you live anywhere that there are squirrels, you should sing to your squirrels. And the thing that the squirrels like the most is when you take top 40 pop songs and replace the word girl with the word squirrel. So, like, for example, talking about my squirrel, talking about my squirrel, my squirrel. Or squirrels, who runs the world, squirrels, who runs the world. They really like that. Swoosh, the one squirrel that lived up on Malcolm Island with me, really liked it when I did this one. Few times I've been around that track, so it's not just gonna happen like that, 'cause I ain't no hollaback squirrel, I ain't no hollaback squirrel. So there's 101 songs with girl in them.
Nice.
Find a squirrel and sing that song to the squirrel with squirrel in place. And the last thing that I do is I do say goodnight to every animal I've ever seen come by this condo, and anything really. I say goodnight to the sunflowers that the squirrels planted. Because the squirrels, they stash nuts, right? So they would steal sunflowers from the bird feeder and then plant them. And then this spring and summer, there's now a whole row of unexpected sunflowers along the front of my condo that I didn't plant. The squirrels planted them. So I say goodnight to those and talk to the plants and trees. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was how you also talk to trees. And so I think a great way to segue into bringing Katie onto the show is to just go back and do the thing that I said I didn't want to do and put you in the pressure of like retelling everything. But let's capture this one story.
Yes. So actually, at this point, because what was so what's a word I could use? Turbulent about this moment in my life is the seller had actually invited us to come stay at the house that we had yet to close on, because our landlord was needing to basically like she already had the next renters coming in, and so our time was kind of up, kind of thing. And my mom ended up passing, and when all of this was happening, things kind of came to a head, and we had a week to pack up all of our stuff and drive like, I think it's like 4 hours. I mean, not too far, but when you're dealing with a lot, it's a lot. So we had this conversation with our I forget his job title. I should have looked it up today, but I forgot. But I called him Gabe when we were talking about it yesterday. We had gotten here with the help of Chris's mom and brother, my partner, and they helped us pack everything. We had movers that helped us, and so kind of fast forward a few days, we're having this conversation with Gabe, our not our realtor, I forget his name, his job title, but anyway, the interest rates, because our seller was having so much difficulty and lag on her end with like paperwork, we were having to continue to pay to renew like what our interest rate was going to be, and etc. Well, by this point, the housing market was really starting to climb. This was like right at the beginning of when the housing market got really bad. And I was already feeling like pretty beat up and just emotionally and mentally. And we're on speaker, and I told Gabe, I was like, you know, if this interest rate comes back like any higher, you know, than just a tiny bit, I was like, we're basically SOL. And we won't be able to get this house, and we won't be able to get a house, period, because at this point, the housing market had just already started to skyrocket. And I don't remember if we kind of like finished the conversation and Gabe, you know, had said that he was going to see what he could do, or if I just kind of left and let my partner kind of finish out the conversation. But I ended up going in the backyard, and our backyard has a bunch of trees, and it's really beautiful because a lady prior to the seller that lived here was a gardener. And I go into the backyard and I'm crying because I'm just like, you know, my mom just passed away and now we might be homeless. Like, what is going on? And I'm crying, and I don't know why. It wasn't like I consciously was like, I'm gonna, you know, ask the trees. I just kind of found myself doing it, and I was crying, and I said it out loud, and I said, hey, I don't know what we're gonna do, and I'd really like for us to stay here. We would love to stay here. And if you want us to stay here, it would, you know, be so nice. And I was basically like, it was almost like a prayer. Like I was asking for help, for something to just show me that like we were gonna be okay. I needed a freaking light at the end of the tunnel because things had been really, really dark. And I was feeling pretty worn out. And as soon as I finished saying this hummingbird zips right up to my face and just stops right in front of my face, looking at me and hovering. And time felt like it slowed down. It was just so beautiful. And I honestly felt stupefied. Like I was just dumbfounded by this tiny little beautiful jewel with wings looking at me right in front of my face. I mean, it definitely stopped my tears. And I don't remember like it flying off or anything. I think I was just so dumbfounded in the moment. And I took it as a sign that the trees were basically saying, hey, you know, have hope. There's hope. It made me feel more welcomed, that's for sure. And sure enough, like I was telling you yesterday that the house, we ended up getting it. And it was pretty miraculous because even though there was so many setbacks, you know, like there were so many hurdles that we experienced, every single time it would spin in our favor, to the point that like not only were we moving forward, but we were like saving money too. So like everything that was like, oh no, like the rug could get ripped out from underneath you. And then it would just spin around like the situation, and we would end up getting, I guess, what you would call like blessed instead. Yeah. So that is one of the reasons why I personally really love the hummingbird ever since that experience, because it felt like a messenger, really.
You told me yesterday that the robin is also one of your favorite birds.
Yes.
This is why I think that the robin and the hummingbird were you, or more appropriately, your fae.
Yeah, I don't know if could I call them my fae. It feels too. I don't own them, but you know what I mean?
I have wrestled with this particular conundrum. I'm glad you also feel the same way. What's the right word for the fae around you? Are they your fae? Vicky, in episode where she talks about her troll's tastes being cookies and cats, she sort of says my fae, you know, like they are her fae in the sense that these are the gnomes and trolls that live with her. So is your cat your cat, or is it its own cat? You know, there's so many extras.
Yeah, that's true.
If you have fae that live with you and are listening to you, like Grimble Grumble is Gem's fae. Gem with a G, Grimble Grumble. It's not that hard to follow, actually, when you follow the alliteration, which is why this show is all alliteration, because the fae that talk in my head when I'm composing the episode descriptions just yammer away at me in the same first letters. Fascinating fae, Gem and Grimble Grumble, etc. So I think it's okay to call them your fae, but truly those two birds were not from around here, and they were like the odd couple, and it was shocking. I said out loud, and I think I do have this in the capture, I haven't listened back to it, but I said out loud after they left, that was weird. It was so weird. The weirdest part by far was when the hummingbird hovered right above the robin's head for a second before he landed. That was over the top for me. Random chance could have allowed for two birds to have come out of the bush at approximately the same time on approximately the same trajectory, after which they parted. Sure, but this guy, he was hovering above the robin's head, and the robin, it didn't look like the robin. It didn't look like that was the first time it had happened to the robin to me. Like it looked like they were used to that. So keep your eyes out in your garden for robins and hummingbirds up to antics together, in close proximity, I would say, Katie.
Yeah, I actually saw a hummingbird today, and it's been a while. So that was really neat.
Okay, well, it was a while since I'd seen a hummingbird yesterday, too. Quite a while, because I mentioned in the episode it's been very hot, and they tend to not be that active when it's that hot because they're a temperate rainforest hummingbird up here, and they don't want to burn themselves out with their poor little supersonic wings, you know? So.
Wait, did I say yesterday? Because I meant today.
Oh, today? No, you said today, but for me, it was interesting to see one yesterday.
Yes, yeah.
There's a woman above me who has a feeder directly above me, and so I routinely see hummingbirds all the time, but I haven't seen them in the past 4 days during the heat wave. That's why it was so remarkable to see the one come out. Also, this is totally relevant. The hummingbirds that are currently attacking that hummingbird feeder in the deck above me are Anna's hummingbirds, and they're quite a bit bigger than the Rufus ones. Like an Anna's hummingbird is almost golf ball sized, and a Rufus hummingbird is like the size of the ball in your mouse kind of thing. If you can remember old ball mice, they're quite a bit smaller. And so it was remarkable to see the Rufus hummingbird. Here's how small the Rufus hummingbird is. He's the same size as the robin's head. He's quite tiny.
Yeah.
So let's move forward if that's okay with you, Katie.
Right.
Let's do less recapping and more fresh takes on fairy talk, because the audience would be thrilled to know that this midstream reintroduction goes as follows. So there might be some people who are first-time listeners, and I didn't say this at the start of the show, so I'll say it here. We're not here to convince anybody of anything on Fascinating Fae, and what you have listened to for more or less the past 30 minutes is two people that shared a Fae experience talking about the relevancy of all the components of it, not the least of which I think is that origin around your housing story, the tricks of fate that seemed like things were going wrong, but things were actually being set right, and then the representation that played out in my experience with the cop yesterday and its relevance to your partner and me and us, and all of that was so poignant. And so that's the framework that, we're coming from, but even still, we're not here to convince anybody of anything on Fascinating Fae. It's really just a show to collect amazing stories about Fae encounters, and I get the privilege of sort of asking questions about it along the way. Yesterday, you had mentioned that you had written down a list of, I believe, 8 or possibly 9 even Fae-related or Fae encounters that you wanted to walk us through. So if it's okay with you, what I'd like to ask you to do is just start that process and allow me, after each story, to ask a few questions before the next story begins. And the final thing I'll say is just that for the audience listening, huge thanks for Katie being here today. You heard my compliment sandwich at the beginning, but for everyone listening, and not the least of which is Katie, there's a beautiful role that you're playing as a listener, because it means that Katie and I are talking not just to each other, but to everyone. And we're all in the room having this conversation together. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Katie, also for being here. And if you'd be so kind as to just give us a lot of context to each encounter, take your time, there's no rush here tonight, and walk us into that first encounter on the list that you would like to go over. If you could do that, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. And yes, I'm just really grateful to be on the show. I was saying, I think I touched on yesterday, I haven't shared my experiences in this capacity ever. There's only my partner and a really close friend of mine that has heard most of these stories. And that's why it was so important for me to express my thanks, not only to you in hosting a place like this where people can come forward, but also to everyone who has shared, because like you said earlier in the episode, it, helps people like me feel encouraged that maybe we can share our experience and not be, you know, be seen as a loon, I guess. So yes, I'm really excited to share these stories. And I guess, like, for me, I grew up in a pretty spiritual family. I didn't really see it for a while. I thought growing up, like, everybody's family is like this. But that's not necessarily true. As I got older and, kind of realized, okay, it's a little different. We're a little different. My family was pretty strong Christian, but still open to, like, especially my dad, like, the possibility of, like, aliens. He would be watching, there was, like, a lot of, like, alien shows on in the 90s, and, um, that was just kind of normal for us to, like, wonder about that stuff. And we had, well, my mom and dad, I think, shared a few unexplainable experiences. But maybe I could share those another time. And we grew up in kind of, back then, it was pretty rural. We didn't even have, like, a grocery store. Like, we had to drive, I think my mom had to drive like 40 minutes. Maybe it was 30. It's hard to say because I was little, but there was really nothing out there except for forest. And so our property, I think, is like my dad's property. It's like a 1.5 acres. But there really wasn't much around. So, like, I would hop the fence and, like, wander around in the woods all the time as a kid. Like, that was my idea of fun. Like, I would just I'd literally stay out playing all day until it was getting dark, and then my parents would, usually it was my dad, would call for me. Which nowadays, like, the idea of letting a child just, like, wander alone in the woods. Sorry, that's a helicopter flying over. Okay. But nowadays, that the idea of, like, letting a kid wander around in the woods is pretty scary thought. But back then, it was pretty quiet. And I guess I could start just chronologically, because I didn't really start believing that fairies or the fae could actually be real probably until about 2 years ago, because of an actual fae experience where I saw with my own eyes something that I couldn't explain. And up until 2 years ago, all of my experiences have been like, I haven't seen it, if that makes sense. I experienced it every other way possible, but I didn't get to actually see. So I'll expound on that. That'll make sense in a little bit. So I guess my first experience was when I was probably, um, I would say I was probably like, let's see, maybe 10 or 11, maybe, or 12, somewhere around there. And it was actually, it was my first Fae experience, but it was indirect. It was through a friend of mine who she was so distraught. Um, so what ended up happening, and I hope it's okay that I share this, because it was my experience somewhat, but not entirely. Um, but she and I were really good friends at school, and a lot of the time I would go over to her house, which was even further in a rural area, and we would, play as kids. And she had like her family had this like golf cart that had the top taken off, so it was just the cart part, and it was a two-seater. That was it, and it was pretty beat up, well loved, I guess. And she would basically drive it down the dirt road that ran by their house and turn into the woods. And there were these like driving paths that had been created, I think, by, if I can remember, maybe her dad and her brother, but I can't, it's kind of fuzzy to me. And so we would get on this golf cart and basically just ride around in this golf cart in the woods. And it was just a small, like all of the little paths kind of just ran into each other. And it was a very like circular little puzzle of little paths that we could drive on. Like they weren't very spread out, and there was like little tight turns and stuff, and it was pretty fun to drive on, especially if you wanted to go fast. It was also kind of dangerous. But yeah, and these woods there were no houses on that side. So it was just woods and then us driving around the go-kart. And I remember very distinctly, I never told her this because I always, was like, oh, it's just me, like I need to chill out or whatever. But she was always driving, I was always riding. But I would always get this weird sense that we were being watched, and I felt kind of like the jeebies a lot of the time, but it was easy to shrug off and just like laugh and continue to have fun, it was easy to ignore, I guess, and that's what I did. And we did this all the time. Like every time I came over, without a doubt, we were getting in that go-kart and we were going to drive around the woods. And being like preteens, there was a sense of freedom to it. And so there was a time when I go over to her house and the go-kart is sitting in the driveway like it always is. And I'm like, hey, you want to go? Like, you want to go to drive in the woods and stuff? And she's being really hesitant. And I got so confused. I was like, why don't you want to go? She was like, oh no, I don't really feel like it. Like she's just being really weird, which was like so opposite because she was always down. And I kind of kept digging. I was like, what's going on? Like, why are you, these weren't my exact words, but basically I was asking her like, why are you being so weird? Like, what's wrong? And she finally said, Like, she was getting more and more distressed as I kept pressing. And she finally said, "You're gonna think I'm crazy." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Something happened, you're gonna think I'm crazy." And I was like, "No, I won't." And by this point, like, I am, like, super curious, but I also care very much about my friend, and I'm whatever it is that's bothering her, like, I wanna know. And she was so adamant at first to not tell me because she was genuinely scared that I was just gonna think she was crazy. And I told her, I was like, "I promise, like, I won't, and, um, nobody's gonna know, like, I won't tell anybody at school, and I'm keeping this private for a reason." Um, as far as, like, her name, sharing it here. But, so she finally was like, "Okay." She was like, "You promise, like, you're not gonna think I'm weird?" Like, she was like, "It was so scary, and it really, like, scared me and creeped me out." And I think she even asked if we could go inside because, like, she didn't wanna be outside anymore, which was also bizarre because her and I loved, being outside together. So we go and, she says, well, because she would go out there by herself sometimes and just, like, drive around and listen to music. And she said that she did this all the time, and she was driving like she always did in the woods, and all of a sudden she's on the path, one of the paths, and this being jumps out from the brush on one side, is running across the path in front of her. So she stops, like, puts on the brakes and stops. As she stops, it stops in the middle of the road, looks at her and hisses, and then runs off to the other side and disappears into the other side of the road. And I asked her, I was like, what did it look like? And she basically described, it was a small um, being that looked human, but very, very small. I think she said that maybe like a foot high or so. But the thing that I clearly remember the most is she said that when it hissed, she said all of its teeth were pointed. Um, I can't quite remember what she said the eyes looked like, but I do remember she describing the mouth, because when she did, that's when she became really distraught. And she said, "I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it happened." She was like, "I thought that maybe it was the gas fumes getting to me." She's like, "But this has never happened before." Like, and really, her go-kart didn't really have like a strong smell to it. Um, so I was even like, "What? I don't know," like about it being like gas fumes, because I think you would have to inhale quite a lot. But I don't even know if you can hallucinate off of gas fumes. But anyway, so that was kind of the first, like, aside from like things that my dad said they experienced, which was more like alien type things. Um, that was like my first personal life, like, experience with, a friend kind of confiding in me.
Fascinating. Was this also in Texas?
Yes, yeah. She lived like further down the same road that I did. But it was probably like maybe 8 miles.
What's interesting about the teeth as part of the description from your friend is that it really does match what Vicky talks about with the teeth of the troll that she's in contact with, where every one of the teeth is jagged. And actually, she goes on to say that the bottom and top teeth are perfectly jagged and they fit perfectly together, which is interesting. I can sense that like you do care about your friends, and that even, you know, this 10-year-old memory that actually shines through, which is another really cool indicator about you and lends a lot of credibility to the story, because there's that emotional component of like you caring about your friend and her acting obviously strangely, you know, in contrast to her normal behavior and love of the woods. It makes me wonder, you know, how many people actually have seen the Fae with their own eyes. And I can't wait till we get to the storytelling portion in your stories tonight, where we get there for you. I don't really have too many questions about a story that, you know, was secondhand, other than just to say thank you, because I think that's incredibly relevant and totally okay to share. Just to answer your first question that you kind of threw out there, totally okay to share that sort of thing, especially when it's a close contact, you know, like that's makes it totally okay. Would you be so kind as to move on now to some other things that you might want to talk about tonight? The floor is totally yours this entire evening here, Katie.
Sure, thank you. So moving on, I guess. Let's see, my experience. Well, actually, let's see. If I'm trying to like remember as I'm like aging in life. So, and it's funny because now that I'm kind of like considering that and looking at my little notes here, I'm like, oh my goodness, they've gotten so much more like active as of recent years, which is funny because I hear a lot of people kind of pondering, like it seems, and a lot of like podcasters who, you know, not just, they're not so much like very specific, that's more like cryptids and aliens type thing. There, a lot of people are starting to feel like these things are becoming more and more frequent, but also wondering if it's just that people are coming out finally, like we're becoming more comfortable in sharing our experiences, which I think it could be a little bit of both. Um, but anyway, I would think that it actually is one of my favorite stories because I experienced it with someone. And that's always kind of a relief because you get another person to be like, okay, did you just see that? Did you just experience that? Or did I just like black out and like have a weird dream? Um, and this happened probably when I was like 13. I would say probably 13, 12, maybe like right around this similar age. I was younger by a couple years between the story I just shared and this one. This one I was a few years older. Um, but I had a really close friend. We had originally met in school, and she had moved away. Her dad like got a different job, so she moved to a different city. So we had this tradition that like once every summer, um, usually I would go to her house because it was really fun. She had a pool. um, and so once a summer, I would, you know, go visit her and stay at her house for like a week. In this particular week, it was in you know, one of the hotter months, and we thought we were so smart because we loved going swimming together, but we we thought we were going to be so smart by swimming at night instead, because that way we wouldn't have to worry about getting sunburned. So every night we are going into the backyard and swimming and playing, and the lights are on in the pool. And I say the lights are on in the pool because I think it had a significant significance to it. And so we're every night, it's almost like clockwork. Like we go outside at night, swim for a couple hours, and then we would, go back inside the house and proceed to have like sleepover girls' night until we passed out. And um, so it's like we've swam for maybe 4 nights in a row, and on like the fifth night, we decided, well, uh, we don't really feel like, swimming. Oh, and I need to add the night prior when we were swimming, we were playing or whatnot, and all of a sudden I just had this really strong sense that we were being watched. And I playfully stood up in the water, and she's like kind of in the deep end. I'm more in the shallow end. And I said, "Hey," I was like, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" Just kind of playfully. I wasn't really even taking myself seriously. And she was like laughing. She's like, "What? No." And I was like, I just kind of like shrugged and like playfully like dunked myself underwater. And that was that. We just kept playing, and I chose to, I guess, in a similar sense, like ignore it. And um, we went inside, and that was it. And so the next night, when we had decided we didn't feel like swimming, um, we were just like hanging out in her room and stuff. And then fast forward, we're in bed and we're starting to drift off to sleep. And her room is upstairs, and she has one window that faces the front yard. And in the front yard, in front of her window is a tree. So like the canopy of the tree is pretty much right in front of her window. And there's really not much room for anything else. Um, and her room was also the coldest room in the house. And so here we are in her room, drifting off to sleep. And we kept hearing this noise that was going, it sounded like it was going up her street, and it would get really like distant, and then it would come back down the street and get really distant the other direction. And about the fifth or sixth time that it did this, because we were both kind of in that in between stage of awake and asleep, we both immediately sat up at the same time, and we're like, what is that noise? Like, it sounds like somebody's mowing. It almost sounded like a lawnmower sound. And I was like, who's mowing their lawn at 3 in the morning? And it also didn't make sense that it's going up and down the street. Like, it was so bizarre and confusing. And it's also getting really hot in her room. We had actually, before we sat up, wondering what the noise was, we were like kicking the covers off because it was getting so hot. And that is not what happens in her room at all. It is literally the ice box of the house all the time. And so we sit up and we're just kind of like wondering what the heck is this noise? We're just kind of listening, and we're listening to it go up and down the street over and over. And all of a sudden it comes, back down the street like it's passing her house, but then it gets really, really, really loud. And it sounds so cliche, but maybe it's cliche for a reason. Her window lights up with bright, bright, bright white light to the point that her whole room is just light. Like, it is so bright. It feels like those stadium lights are being shoved in her window. But what's crazy, because we were told, oh, well, it was probably like a helicopter with a spotlight, but it would have had to been like right up in her window, and there's a tree. Like, it would have been at least a little like deflected, I guess would be the right word. I'm not sure. By the tree. That wasn't the case. Whatever it was just was just right there in the window. And we're just in that moment. I mean, it all happened so quickly, but at the same time, it felt so slow. And next thing we know, we're just sitting in the dark in her room. And we're both freaking out, and we're both like, what was that? What was that? She's kind of getting scared, and I was more like intrigued. And we were just kind of freaking out and asking each other, what was that? Did you see that? What was that? Did you see that? And this goes on for a little while, and then all of a sudden I realized that the time between the window lighting up and her room lighting up with light and us sitting in the dark, we cannot remember what happened. Like, till this day, we still talk about it. And we cannot remember the light leaving or the sound stopping or like fading. None of that. There's just this moment of her room being lit up. We're sitting on her bed staring at it at the window, and then we're in the dark. And there's no noise, no nothing. And we're just in the dark in her room, like nothing happened. And when I pointed that out to her, I said, do you remember anything, between and it was lit up and now? And she's like, oh my God, no, which scared her even more. And I was just like, what was that? Needless to say, she was so scared. She made me sleep on the side of the bed that was closer to the window. Which I was actually fine with because I wasn't as terrified. I was more fascinated. But yeah, so that was, to this day, we kind of chalk it up to it had to have been an alien abduction. And by their grace, we kind of have theorized that our memories were erased out of a courtesy, but we don't know what happened or why.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. As I'm listening to that, it feels so much to me as though if I were to exchange two girls at a sleepover in a bedroom in Texas for me and Mrs. X aboard my boat, and maybe one or two other details, so much like my own encounter. Right down to the time problem. And I have touched on this in the show, but I haven't really talked about it a lot because it's the part of my encounter that bothers me the most.
Mm.
I'm an auditory person. I think everyone who listens to this show hopefully appreciates that I listen, and I don't just listen to like the people talking, but I like listen to music, I listen to sound, and I try to make sound and music. I used to be in a band and I used to manage bands. So I love music. And when I was listening to Catch a Fire with Mrs. X aboard my boat and the ferry came through and left, that whole thing in real time feels like it took 3 seconds. But the music was different. And that I remember. And it's bothered me for a long time. Like it was a fully different playlist, meaning at least a 45-minute album theoretically had played out. I can't remember exactly which Catch a Fire song we were on, but I remember we had started listening to it not long before my encounter. But the thing that trips me the most out about listening to you speak is this lawnmower sound then getting really, really loud. I talk about how it sounded like a Harley Davidson was in my ear. Was it kind of that level of volume? I'm curious.
Yeah, I would say so, because the next morning we were both like still so freaked out.
It's so loud that it's louder than you can describe, is how I would put it. And it's the part of my encounter that I couldn't shake. My rational brain was doing the thing that a rational person would be expected to do, which was rationalizing and trying to compartmentalize what I'd seen and heard. And I kept going like 3/4 of the way down the rationalization process successfully. And then I'd hit that brick wall of how it sounded. And I would start back at the top and go back down. Okay, no, it was bird. It must have been a bird. And the volume was not attributable to anything I had previously encountered.
Yes, yeah.
Like you're saying, like this is a in the air object. You can detect motion of sound. I had all that present. This thing came from far away, got closer, and then went far away, just like you're describing in mine. And then the volume at its peak intensity when it was closest to me was unbelievable. Like there was no other available space for sound is how I describe it.
Yeah, and the next morning we actually asked her parents and her brothers, like, did y'all hear anything last night? Because it was so loud, we didn't understand how they didn't wake up.
Burgoyne Bay, where my boat was anchored, does have some people that live full-time in Burgoyne Bay. And there's maybe 8 or 9 people that live in their boats full-time in that little isolated bay. And one of them is this guy named Dave, who I know pretty well. And the next morning I asked him, I'm like, did you hear anything loud come into the bay last night? And he was like, no. I mean, he could have been asleep, so it's hard to decide. But the other thing that I want to mention that resonates with what you just said with my own experience is the intensity of the illumination. I described it like this. I said there was no available light. There was like it was so bright that there wasn't even shadows. It was so bright that everything was just that brightness.
Yeah, that's how this was.
Now just hear me out for a second. Okay, spacecraft and alien abductions would, like in my opinion, would need like a craft and some mechanism of what you're talking about. And what you're describing sounding like sort of like a lawnmower, I don't personally think spacecraft sound like that based on the 4 that I've seen, which were ultra silent and had no sound at all really. I do think though that fae, winged fae especially, sound like that. And I personally, this is just me, I wasn't there, so I don't remember you telling me I was there in this story you just told. Anyway, I just feel like the volume and the illumination intensity are a byproduct of wings from a fae and a fae's soul. This is what I take it away from my own personal experience, because I did catch a look at my fae when it stopped between us, and it was shining that bright, intense light, of which you and I are both describing very, very similarly. It was shooting that out of itself like a Care Bear. No joke. and from its entire self, like in the movie Cocoon, it was just made of light. And that's how it looked. And that was so bright that it was like washing the entire interior space of the cabin of the boat with light, to the point where like it was difficult to make out other objects because everything was so perfectly illuminated. It was so hard to describe. It's so bright.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I mean, it was definitely an experience that I'm really grateful she was there too.
That's not the least of which of the similarities, because I had another person with me. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. No spoilers for anyone, but I did talk with a gentleman from Scotland who recently saw a fairy do something in front of him that is so close to mine. And now, just like before, not only do you have this Fae encounter with me with the robin and the hummingbird under your hat as a feather in that hat, but this totally matches with the last guest I spoke to. The Fae narrative of lining up back-to-back guests continues. Very, very fascinating. That me on the coast, you as a 10-year-old girl in Texas, this guy as a family man in his late 50s in Scotland are all describing remarkably similar winged Fae doing stuff. That's so neat. Katie, I don't have any more questions about this particular encounter. You've described it really, really well, and you gave so much great context. I'm hoping you can do that with the rest of your stories, and let's make the space for the next one. What else would you like to move forward towards? And thank you so much for that. That really does a number on me, because that sounds like almost 75% to the detail, with the exception of the place and who I was with and the color, what I experienced. Very, very interesting.
My friend, she jokes around saying, yeah, we were basically like swimming around in a giant light bulb, like, to something in the air. It's like, oh, what are these beings doing, swimming around, having fun and laughing at night.
Same with me and Mrs. X. We were having the time of our lives. I do think they're attracted to high vibrational frequencies of human energy. They want to affirm it in us.
Yeah.
They want to say, good job being that way. Do that more. That's what I feel like when they show themselves to 2 super happy people or 3 super happy people or whatever. I feel like they're seeing that goodness in us on full display. It attracts them, and their presence is in part a reward for being happy.
I was just going to say, I feel like it's like a curiosity that they have. And whether, really, I've also wondered, alien or fairy, like, what's the difference? And it felt like curiosity. We were being pretty obnoxious and loud because we could. We were outside and it was nighttime, and we were no parents, and so it was exciting. And we were just having a blast out there, in a big shiny watery light bulb that's easy to see from the sky. So yeah, it's interesting. And it seems that a lot of stories that I've heard of encounters, water a lot of the time seems to be a factor.
What do you think is about that? What do you think is the water connection to the Fae? No wrong answers. I'm just curious what your insights bring up.
I've wondered, because it's almost like a what's the word? What's the word for a space that's there but it's not at the same time?
Oh yeah, liminal.
Liminal. It's a liminal element, I feel like.
Big thanks to Aaron from Okie Pinokie Adventures for initially defining liminal for me in an episode. That's why I know that.
Words are hard.
Yeah, I had not encountered the word liminal before fairy talk at all, actually. And I like words too because I'm like hip hop listener and I like to read and stuff, and I do like words, but I had not really thought of or encountered liminal. You find it honestly most in the fairy talk out of anywhere, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, it comes up quite a bit.
I still don't know that I fully understand it as a term, other than just that what you're saying. It's kind of like a transitional space.
Yeah.
It reminds me of what we talked about yesterday briefly. Let's go here for a second when we talked about physics and light, and so now we're talking about water. So we'll start with water. You know, hydrogen and oxygen atoms, which totally on their own are just gas and evaporate effectively, or just have like they're not really easy to contain. They're just floating around, come together, and then you have water. How wild is that? Go periodic table of elements. And you can separate the two in theory to get endless energy. I wonder if we'll ever get there. But water is the spark of all life. The saying "no water, no life" is a very real statement.
Yeah.
Contrastingly, and maybe not contrastingly so much because we're talking about elements here, you know, earth, air, water, fire. I guess fire does constitute light as part of that elemental representation. And so there's all this talk about the Fae being of the earth, water definitely coming up in Fae encounters more than not, actually. And then I'm trying to interject into this debate, because it is a debate. Let's be clear, everybody. Be it resolved, the Fae are real. Here are 27 arguments so far in favor of this argument. That's basically how fascinating Fae is functioning, if you would. So the thing that I was saying yesterday that I'll just kind of bring into this conversation as we move on to your next story, just as a way of kind of finishing off this one, because we're both talking about extreme bright light as part of our encounters. At the beginning of Leaf's episode, I do a quantum physics lesson from the internet as an insertion, because her name's Leaf and they're talking about the quantum leaf. And I basically said that like light, for those that are not necessarily familiar with quantum physics or feel intimidated by it, is difficult to understand the way that most physicists talk about it. So I was trying to talk about it in a way that felt better or easier to understand even for myself, because I still struggle with understanding what the heck those guys are getting on about most of the time, even as much as I'm trying to put it into this conversation. The idea being like a wave is something like a waveform, like a radio wave. And no matter how much you amplify a radio wave and point it at something, it's mostly just a wave. Like it's in and of itself invisible and doesn't really have like a capacity to affect the matter around it. I mean, that's talking like not completely, because you can do stuff with waves that obviously affect matter, but you get the point that it's more just like something that is moving through material as opposed to affecting material, which is why your cell phone wave or your radio wave can make it through your wall to the receiver, because it moves through stuff. A particle is definitely more like a particle of something. So, you know, like an example would be like the way that light is a particle is how you can focus it into a laser and cut, you know, steel and other things. That's not because you're focusing the wavelength of light, it's because you're focusing the particle part of light. But what's weird about light is that it's both a wave and a particle. And it's art, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that physics and quantum physics and so on and so forth is still unpacking, but light is a common thing. It's around us all the time, and it comes out of the sun, and it's both hitting us as a wavelength and as a particle. And when that Leaf segues at the start of her episode, what they're basically saying is the particle part hits the plant, and the plant needs to capture the particle and put it through photosynthesis so quickly that there's no way for the particle to actually have hit the plant and get to where that reaction occurs in time. It's just not possible, but it does happen. And so when scientists figured out that there's just no way for this to occur, but it does happen, they basically figured out that the particle of light does something weird. They basically say weird science or I can't remember the exact term in quantum physics, but it more or less boils down to weird stuff, or weird science. But the particle enters the leaf, and as it enters the leaf, two things are happening. The particle itself is going from a single particle of light and changing into literally billions of particles of light. So it's changing from one into billions. And the plant leaf is actually, if you would, orchestrating that transaction, because it is quantum superpositioning those particles within its leaf structure in order to get them to the reaction site. So in effect, when a particle of light hits a leaf, that particle of light is actually everywhere in the leaf at the same time, all at once. It's every possible place all at once, and it is also the exact place where there happens to be an available receptor capable of performing photosynthesis. And there's millions and billions of these little receptors, and the plant is in real time taking particles and waves and turning them into plant that we can all see. And so the plants are actually taking what is raw light and they're turning it into billions of potential placements, quantum superpositioning, and then they're finally converting it from one thing, which is the wavelength and particle that once was, into now a unit of like sugar which now feeds this sucrose and plant growth. Absolutely astonishing when you boil it down. Fairies and water and fairies and light, kind of, to me, I was thinking about this a lot last night after we lost the conversation, which is why I'm happy to talk about it here now, to get the chance to talk about it is what I'm happy about. With you again, Katie, because you're so smart around this topic matter, and you and I speculate in a similar fashion, I feel. So it's nice to talk to you for that reason too. But my point, just to wrap it up, and we'll move on to your next story here, I kind of feel like if a leaf of a tree can quantum superposition the particles of sun and do what it wants with it, which we basically at the end of the day see as it turning itself into a leaf. So it's truly and literally taking light and turning it into something. And then what is to say then that the quantum superpositioning capacity of light, because a particle of light can be everywhere at once, and a plant can make it go everywhere at once. That's the shorthand, right? A particle can be everywhere at once of light, and a plant can make it do that. What's to say that a fairy is not just light itself, and that this quantum realm or this veil in part is like them doing stuff within the capacity that superpositioning allows, which is basically like being everywhere at once. And that's why I and you, thousands of miles apart, getting ready to talk, can have this like shared Fey experience so relevant to one another throughout what it seems to be no limit of space or time or distance, or like even our own separate thoughts from one another on some level. It's quite astonishing. And so that's why I keep trying to say quantum physics stuff in this show, because I do think that if the Fae are interdimensional, the idea of magic and science are the same. They come together and they collide, because the quantum answer to the real problems they're trying to solve always relies on something funky, like, oh yeah, light, yeah, it's just a wavelength, it just hits us. Oh wait, it's a particle too. That's funky. It's called the duality of light. It's one of those big mysteries of life. And then, of course, what they're figuring out is that mystery that seems so perplexing is used by all of biology, including birds who can see the difference in the quantum positioning of particles of light. And what's so messed up, and I'll interject this in the coming episode that I referenced about the man from Scotland, and I'll put something about quantum physics towards the end of this episode for you here, Katie, but birds see particles of light coming out of the sun. They don't actually, see them the way that we do, like, oh, things are lit up. They see the particles. And there's a magnetic field to Earth strong enough that some of the particles, which effectively are in both places at the same time, like we just talked about, as they're coming into Earth's field, they're getting pulled in one direction and another by the Earth's magnetic field. And the bird can see the difference between the quantum positioning of those particles of light with its eye, thus knowing that it's heading north or not, because it can see that the position of the quantum positioning between particles changes as it changes direction. Because the Earth's field is fixed and the particles are coming from a fixed direction out of the sun. It's wild. Basically what it means is that animals do see the quantum. It's actually scientifically proven that they see invisible, not even microscopic, but quantum processes with their bare eyes. So all of this is to say, Katie, I think that being in water is kind of like where maybe light or this quantum superpositioning capacity of light mixed with water on some level might be that kind of like holy grail of the birth of life on Earth that everyone keeps thinking about. And that maybe light itself is much more of its own intelligence, and it's just much more powerful than I think we understand. And I do think, without even really knowing what I'm trying to say, I do think that the fairies are light. I think that we are light. If you follow the bouncing ball, we eat the plants, and that's what makes us. And so it all starts with light, no matter what. Even the stuff that we rely on for a lot of technology, comes from plant material or original organic material. Everything, a lot of it, oil and gas. So much stuff started off as light and is all just turned into what we see around us. And so, maybe the Fae are actually kind of like half dirt, like half the raw stuff of Earth, the accumulated stardust, and maybe they're half light, and maybe like us, they're in a medium, but our medium is more water, which is pretty clear with humans, and their medium is more like interdimensional quantum soup. I don't know.
Yeah, it's this is the kind of things I think about all the time.
What keeps me up at night keeps you up at night. It's nice to have a friend. Katie, thanks for letting me muse. Any responses to that are totally cool. And then, be so kind as to move us forward, please, into your next storytelling, which I'm eagerly anticipating here tonight.
Yeah, I don't really have much else to add. I think it was well put, for sure. I've wondered, quite a lot about even just other stories about people talking about bridges are also often associated with a lot of experiences and ley lines or like railroads, which again, bridges, rivers, railroads, they're liminal places where, it serves a purpose, but it doesn't. It's hard to explain because a bridge and a railroad and a river are in motion, but they're sitting. It's a place to transport from point A to point B.
The thing with a river that I want to add is this. When you look at a river, it's always there, but it's never the same water.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Pocahontas song.
Yeah. Pocahontas, underrated soundtrack. Great movie, too. It's too bad what Disney did to the story of what that actually is. And any of the people listening who are identifying as first peoples of these places, man, sorry for being a white dude.
I was actually having the thought that a lot of indigenous people are rolling their eyeballs at us because they've known about all of these connections with nature and the little folk for so long.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I have a pretty decent set of indigenous friends because BC has quite a healthy indigenous population, and I have lived mostly in remote places, like I mentioned a couple times on this show. And I had one pretty profound, which I won't share this person's name, but we were talking about my Sasquatch encounter because it happened a couple of years ago, and I was telling this person and he just seemed nonplussed in a weird way. And I thought, well, like, don't you believe me? He's like, no, I'm just bored. It's like not even exciting to me. Like, of course you saw a Sasquatch. It's like saying you saw an eagle. Can we get on with, doing what we're doing here? And it really, truly was that way. Like, this guy wasn't being a dick about it. He just was like, yeah, what do you, like, you're trying to tell me about a mystical thing? I know all about that stuff. The first peoples had lived within what would be best described, in my opinion, as an animistic world where the raccoon and the bulrush and the frog were not separate from oneself, but were part of oneself. The best way that I've ever heard it described by my First Nations friends was that they say the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. Mm-hmm. And like the land owns us, like it makes us. We are taking care of it because it is what gives birth to us, figuratively, literally. Go back to whatever origin story you want in First Peoples culture. It's coming out of the ground most of the time. Thanks for getting into this beautiful talk with me. I'll tell you what, just for a quick pause, and again, I'm going to edit this. I'm also going to stop and save now because we've talked for 1 hour again. Okay. And then I'm just going to come back. So just take a minute and compose yourself for your next story. I'm just going to stop and save, and I'm going to grab another joint. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's okay.
Phalians, the only known hybrid species between an extraterrestrial and an interdimensional. Katie, human and non-human listeners of A Fascinating Fae, we will be back next week with part 2.
Well, I've been dreaming of a land, a world at one with what is what, where I can understand, and you would leave me by the hand, take me to a garden found where flowers bloom all year round, and I do believe it's there. Yeah, I do believe it's there. The angels singing by the shore, and people play right through the day, just like we did before. And they have never gone to war, never stood on a battlefield or held a heavy sword or shield, and I do believe it's there. Yeah, I do believe it's there. Soar to the land where people stand with 2 feet on the floor, where they have never gone to war, never stood on a battlefield or held a heavy sword or shield, and I do believe it's there. believe it's there. Yeah, I do believe it's there.